October 1943. Naples Harbor, Italy. The captured Italian army cook stared in disbelief at the American officer's request. After 2 years preparing meager rations for fascist officers on the North African front, Sergeant Paolo Ricci couldn't comprehend what the American lieutenant was asking. "We need men who can cook real Italian food, not just for officers, but for everyone. Our men, your men, everyone." The concept seemed impossible to Ricci, who had watched Italy's food system collapse under fascist rationing. The Allied invasion of mainland Italy and the Italian surrender on September 8, 1943, had created an unprecedented situation. Approximately 50,183 Italian soldiers found themselves in American custody, their status transformed overnight from enemies to co-belligerents after Italy declared war on Germany. Military records from Fifth Army headquarters document the moment when American logistical officers recognized an opportunity. Italian military kitchens had maintained surprisingly high standards despite material shortages. Even with limited ingredients, Italian army cooks had demonstrated remarkable culinary ingenuity. Captain William Morris, a quartermaster officer with the Fifth Army, later recorded his observations. "The Italian military cooks achieved more with less than any Allied force. Their ability to create flavor from minimal ingredients presented an obvious resource we couldn't ignore." This recognition would evolve into the foundation of the Italian Service Units, ISUs, a program that transformed enemy prisoners into valued contributors to the Allied war effort. For the Italian prisoners, American abundance created immediate cognitive dissonance. Under Mussolini's autarkic food policies, Italian civilians received approximately 1,000 calories daily by 1943. Military rations, while prioritized, rarely exceeded 2,200 calories. Basic ingredients like wheat, sugar, and olive oil had become precious commodities. Coffee disappeared entirely, replaced by chicory substitutes. Meat appeared once weekly at most. The American military's daily ration, by contrast, provided 3,400 calories. Quartermaster records show Fifth Army units in Italy received weekly allotments of 14 pounds of meat per man, 5 pounds of sugar, unlimited coffee, and abundant wheat flour. This disparity represented the first fracture in fascist propaganda that had portrayed Americans as weak and materially deprived. Sergeant Ricci, like most Italian prisoners, expected harsh treatment. Fascist propaganda had prepared Italian troops to expect American brutality and primitive conditions. Instead, within hours of capture, Italian soldiers received K rations containing canned meat, powdered coffee, sugar, and chocolate, items many hadn't seen in civilian markets for years. The 16th and 428 Italians who would eventually serve in culinary capacities began their transformation with this fundamental realization. American logistics could support food abundance beyond Italian imagination. When American officers first proposed establishing dedicated Italian cooking units, many prisoners suspected a propaganda exercise. This skepticism dissolved when supply requisitions arrived. At the first experimental mess unit established near Naples in October 1943, American quartermasters delivered 800 pounds of flour, 200 pounds of sugar, 150 pounds of coffee, 300 pounds of meat, and 120 litres of olive oil, quantities that would have supplied an Italian company for weeks. This single delivery was intended for 3 days' operation. Lieutenant James Peterson, who supervised the initial program, documented the Italian cook's reaction. "They kept asking if there was a mistake in the requisition. When we confirmed the quantities, several men became emotional. One veteran cook said it was the first time in 4 years he could prepare food without worrying about running out of ingredients." This abundance created immediate tension within Italian culinary tradition, which emphasized quality ingredients prepared simply. American expectations focused on quantity and filling calories. This cultural disconnect would become the creative space where culinary diplomacy emerged, transforming enemies into cultural ambassadors through the universal language of food. November 1943. Camp Florence, Arizona. The American mess sergeant watched skeptically as 34 Italian prisoners transformed the camp kitchen. Men who had been enemies weeks earlier now controlled the food supply for 2,000 personnel. The systematic identification of culinary talent among Italian prisoners began immediately after the September armistice. American intelligence officers reviewed service records, identifying 4,782 men with professional cooking experience before conscription. These included restaurant chefs, hotel cooks, and family bakery operators. An additional 11,646 were classified as having substantial culinary knowledge, a category that reflected the fundamental role food preparation played in Italian male identity. The formal establishment of the Italian Service Units (ISU) program in November 1943 created the administrative structure for this unprecedented experiment. War Department Directive AG 383.7 authorized the conversion of Italian POW status to Italian Service Unit members, allowing them to work outside standard Geneva Convention restrictions. This classification enabled specialized units, with culinary teams among the most successful. Military historians have identified this program as the largest organized culinary exchange in modern military history. Initial American skepticism manifested in strict oversight. At Camp Florence, armed guards observed the first meals prepared by Italian cooks. Lieutenant Robert Wilson documented this tension. The first day, our men stood back from the serving line, suspicious of food prepared by former enemies. By the third day, lines formed 30 minutes before meals. This transformation occurred across the 42 primary camps hosting Italian service units. The difference in approach became immediately apparent. American military cooking emphasized calories and standardization, a system designed for maximum efficiency but minimum culinary distinction. Italian military cooking, despite material shortages, maintained regional traditions and technical standards. At Fort Meade, Maryland, mess reports from December 1943 note, Italian cooks utilize identical ingredients to standard army kitchens, but achieve approximately 40% greater satisfaction ratings from personnel. Supply requisitions tell a remarkable story of culinary diplomacy. Standard American military kitchens ordered ingredients by weight and nutritional requirements. Italian-operated kitchens submitted requests specifying particular varieties and qualities. At Camp Hale, Colorado, American quartermasters encountered their first requisition for 6 varieties of dried herbs, 3 olive oil types distinguished by acidity levels, and flour specified by protein content. These requests initially created logistical confusion, but eventually educated American supply officers about ingredient quality distinctions. The first meals served by Italian cooks shattered American expectations. At Camp Ellis, Illinois, the debut menu in December 1943 featured handmade pasta with ragu, roasted meats with rosemary, and fresh-baked bread, all produced at scale for 1,500 men using standard army ingredients supplemented with herbs grown in small kitchen gardens the Italians established. The base commander's report noted, personnel previously avoiding mess hall attendants now arrive early. Food waste has decreased approximately 80%. Language barriers initially complicated the program. The War Department addressed this by creating specialized dictionaries of culinary terms, with 5,000 copies distributed by February 1944. These handbooks paired Italian cooking terminology with American equivalents, allowing quartermaster staff to communicate with Italian cooks. Kitchen operations required development of unique hybrid vocabulary. Technical Italian terms entered American military kitchens, while American measurements and equipment names were adopted by Italian cooks. American military documents reveal the scale of this culinary operation. By March 1944, Italian service units operated kitchen facilities, feeding approximately 250,000 personnel daily across American installations. The program expanded beyond pure necessity to include bread bakeries, pasta production, and preservation of seasonal ingredients. The transition from suspicious enemies to valued culinary professionals occurred with remarkable speed, driven by the universal appreciation for quality food. As one mess officer at Fort Lawton, Washington, reported, "The transformation of morale through improved food quality has been more effective than any other program implemented. Men who arrive in mess halls hostile toward Italian personnel leave as their defenders." Spring 1944, Fort Carson, Colorado. The aroma of slowly simmered tomatoes and herbs filled the massive kitchen as 23 Italian cooks transformed army provisions into dishes from their homeland. American soldiers lined up eagerly, drawn by scents most had never experienced. Staff Sergeant Marco Vincenti stood over a 40-gallon pot, stirring sauce with the same wooden spoon he'd carried from Naples. "The secret is time," he explained to the American assistant assigned to him. "Americans cook with the clock, Italians cook with patience." The culinary transformation spread across military installations with remarkable speed. Army quartermaster records from April 1944 document the standardization of Italian cooking techniques for large-scale feeding operations. A typical recipe for pasta al pomodoro began with instructions for 500 servings. Heat 12 gallons of olive oil in 4 separate kettles. Add 50 pounds of diced onions. These recipes, maintained in military archives, show the systematic scaling of traditional methods without compromising fundamental techniques. American soldiers' exposure to authentic Italian cuisine created immediate cultural impact. Before the war, Italian food in America meant primarily heavily Americanized dishes. A survey conducted among 5,000 servicemen in 1943 found only 8% had tasted authentic Italian cuisine before military service. By mid-1944, approximately 740,000 American personnel had regular access to Italian-operated mess facilities. This exposure fundamentally reshaped American understanding of Mediterranean cuisine. The contrast between American perceptions and Italian reality emerged through mess hall encounters. Private Joseph Miller from Iowa wrote home in May 1944, "The Italian cooks make pasta fresh every day. Nothing like the canned spaghetti we had back home. They layer flavors I never knew existed." This education in flavor and technique occurred daily across dozens of military installations. Statistical evidence of the program's success appears in multiple reports. Food waste, a significant military logistics concern, decreased by 34.2% in Italian-operated facilities. Meal attendance increased 28.7% compared to standard mess operations. Morale surveys conducted by the Quartermaster Corps showed 92.3% approval ratings for Italian cooking programs compared to 56.7% for standard mess operations. The scale of production demonstrated remarkable efficiency. At Camp Atterbury, Indiana, Italian bakers produced 12,000 loaves of bread daily, using traditional long fermentation methods. Fort Dix, New Jersey, saw production of 600 pounds of fresh pasta daily. These operations required significant adaptation of Italian methods for American equipment and scale. Military supply records from summer 1944 show the evolution of ingredient requisitions. Standard Army provisions expanded to include 27 herbs and spices not previously stocked, 6 varieties of cheese, and specialized flour types. The Quartermaster Corps established dedicated procurement channels for olive oil, importing approximately 1.2 million gallons annually by 1945, primarily for Italian cooking units. Cultural misunderstandings created occasional tension that required resolution. American expectations of Italian food sometimes conflicted with regional Italian traditions. At Fort Lewis, Washington, Mess Officer Lieutenant Paul Williams documented a brief pasta uprising when southern Italian cooks refused to prepare northern Italian risotto, considering it culturally inappropriate. The resolution involved recruiting specific northern Italian specialists for regional dishes. Testimonials from both sides reveal the developing mutual respect. Sergeant Anthony Calabresi, an American mess administrator at Camp Hale, noted, "Before the Italians arrived, I ran a feeding operation. Now I manage a restaurant." Italian cook Corporal Enzo Rossi wrote in a censored letter home, "Americans waste food shockingly, but appreciate quality with enthusiasm I never expected from such young men." The expansion of the program across facilities required standardization while preserving authenticity. The War Department published Manual TM-10-405, Italian Cooking for Military Operations, in September 1944, distributing 25,000 copies to quartermaster personnel. This 142-page document codified techniques, equipment adaptations, and supply requirements. Military historians recognize this as the first systematic documentation of Italian cuisine by the US government, unintentionally preserving traditional methods that would influence post-war American dining for decades. December 1944, Fort Hamilton, New York. The mess hall transformed for Christmas dinner bore little resemblance to a military dining facility. White tablecloths covered long tables. Handmade centerpieces featuring pine branches and red berries created a festive atmosphere. The Italian cooks had worked through the night, preparing traditional holiday dishes from their homeland. As American soldiers and their Italian counterparts shared this feast, the boundaries between former enemies dissolved completely. Special holiday meals emerged as cultural highlights that extended the Italian cooking program beyond daily sustenance. Military records document these events with unusual detail. The Christmas 1944 dinner at Fort Hamilton served 2,700 personnel with a 7-course menu. Antipasti platters featuring house-cured meats, minestrone soup, handmade ravioli filled with ricotta and spinach, roasted turkey with rosemary and garlic, vegetable contorni, panettone bread pudding, and Italian cookies. Quartermaster requisitions show special allocations for these events: 400 pounds of flour for pasta and desserts, 180 pounds of sugar, 50 pounds of nuts, and 35 gallons of wine for cooking purposes. The teaching component of the program formalized as demand grew. By early 1945, the War Department established culinary exchange protocols that paired American mess personnel with Italian counterparts. At Fort Bragg, North Carolina, a structured 8-week training program taught 120 American cooks traditional Italian techniques. Technical Sergeant William Cooper, who completed this program, reported, "I've been cooking Army food for 3 years. The Italians taught me that military feeding can maintain dignity and tradition despite scale constraints." This knowledge transfer would profoundly influence post-war American institutional cooking. Impact extended beyond military boundaries into surrounding communities. Civilian employees working on bases encountered Italian cooking, creating demand for ingredients and techniques previously unknown in many American regions. In Salina, Kansas, local grocers near Camp Phillips began stocking Italian ingredients to meet weekend demand from civilian workers who had experienced authentic dishes on base. The manager of Peterson's Grocery noted in February 1945, "We sold more olive oil in the past 6 months than in the previous 10 years combined." The program's expansion to specialized facilities demonstrated its remarkable success. Military hospitals incorporated Italian cooking units after medical officers reported improved patient recovery rates and reduced food refusal. At Fitzsimons Army Hospital in Denver, Italian cooks prepared approximately 1,800 meals daily for recovering wounded. Hospital records from March 1945 note, patient nutrition improved approximately 27% following implementation of Italian menu items. Weight maintenance among long-term recovery patients shows statistically significant improvement. Officers' clubs represented another expansion area. At Fort Dix, New Jersey, the officers' mess operated by Italian specialists became so renowned that personnel from nearby bases traveled specifically for meals. Reservation books preserved in military archives show weekend waitlists exceeding 200 names. This popularity created occasional tension as enlisted personnel questioned the preferential access to superior food, leading to the democratic expansion of Italian cooking across rank divisions. Statistical evidence of the program's impact appears in multiple military assessments. Productivity measurements conducted at Camp Upton, New York in April 1945 found 18.7% reduction in sick days among personnel regularly consuming Italian-prepared meals compared to control groups. Morale surveys from the same period show 89.3% of respondents rating food quality as excellent in Italian-operated facilities, compared to 42.1% in standard operations. The adaptation of regional Italian specialties reflected the program's growing sophistication. Initial menus focused on broadly recognizable dishes, but by mid-1945, regional specialties appeared regularly. Military records document the production of Sicilian arancini, Ligurian focaccia, and Piedmontese risotto in various installations. Supply requisitions from this period show increasing specificity. 00 flour for pasta production, specific olive varieties, and regional cheese types. As Americans learned Italian techniques, cultural exchange flowed both directions. Italian cooks incorporated American ingredients and preferences into traditional preparations. The fusion dishes that emerged, documented in mess hall records, included innovations like turkey tetrazzini, spaghetti with meatballs enlarged to American proportions, and pizza variations incorporating ingredients like American cheese. These adaptations would later become standard in post-war Italian-American restaurants. By summer 1945, with the European War concluded, the Italian cooking program represented one of the war's most unexpected successes. What began as a pragmatic solution for feeding troops had evolved into comprehensive cultural exchange. The 16,528 Italian cooks who participated had fundamentally altered American military dining while experiencing American abundance that contradicted fascist propaganda. As victory celebrations commenced, the foundations for a profound culinary transformation had been established through the universal language of food. September 1945. Port of New York. Giuseppe Moretti stood at the ship's railing, watching the Manhattan skyline recede. In his pocket, honorable discharge papers from the Italian service unit at Fort Dix. In his footlocker, American cooking equipment he'd been permitted to keep, a set of measuring cups, stainless steel whisks, and a chef's knife manufactured in Ohio. After 2 years cooking for American troops, he was returning to a homeland he barely recognized. The war's end initiated the gradual dissolution of the Italian cooking program. Military records document the systematic repatriation process. Of the 16,428 Italian cooks who served in American facilities, 12,874 returned to Italy between August 1945 and March 1946. The remaining 3,154 submitted applications to remain in the United States, with 2,171 eventually receiving permission. This 22% retention rate exceeded any other specialist category among Italian service units, reflecting both the success of the program and the economic opportunities it created. The Italian cooks returning home encountered a devastated culinary landscape. Civilian food rations in post-war Italy averaged 1,180 calories daily when available. Basic ingredients remained severely restricted. Sugar allowance stood at 200 grams monthly per person. Olive oil, the foundation of Italian cooking, was limited to 100 milliliters weekly. Meat appeared in markets sporadically, often restricted to 200 grams monthly per adult. This scarcity contrasted sharply with the abundance these men had experienced in American kitchens. American support followed these returning cooks. Military records show approximately 284,000 food packages sent to former Italian service unit members between 1946 and 1948. These packages, distributed through military postal channels, contained items otherwise unobtainable in post-war Italy: coffee, sugar, chocolate, canned meats, and cooking fats. Former Sergeant Vincenzo Lombardi wrote to his American commanding officer in February 1946, "The package you sent feeds my extended family for 2 weeks. My neighbors cannot believe such abundance exists anywhere." The skills acquired in American kitchens proved valuable in Italy's economic recovery. Survey data collected by Allied occupation authorities in 1947 found that 72% of returned Italian military cooks secured employment in food service within 6 months, compared to 36% employment rate among general returning military personnel. Their exposure to large-scale operations and systematic food management created immediate advantages in the rebuilding hospitality sector. American servicemen returning home carried newfound appreciation for authentic Italian cuisine. Veterans surveys conducted in 1947 found that 63% of respondents listed real Italian food among experiences they wished to continue in civilian life. This demand created market opportunities that would reshape American dining. The GI Bill enabled several hundred veterans to open restaurants featuring dishes they had encountered in military mess halls operated by Italians. The correspondence between Italian cooks and their American counterparts continued for decades. Military archives contain thousands of letters exchanged between 1946 and 1970. These communications included recipe exchanges, updates on family developments, and business advice. Through these personal connections, culinary techniques and traditions flowed in both directions, creating a living network of gastronomic exchange. Economic impact became immediately apparent in post-war Italian restaurant culture. Establishments opened by returned military cooks featured innovations adapted from American operations, standardized recipes, portion control systems, and equipment modifications for consistency. These techniques, combined with traditional Italian cooking knowledge, created a new hybrid approach that improved profitability while maintaining authenticity. Statistical comparison between pre-war and post-war Italian-American food relations reveals the program's lasting significance. Italian food exports to America increased 340% between 1946 and 1955. American tourism to Italy, heavily motivated by culinary interests, grew 270% during the same period. The Italian government's tourism promotion materials from 1950 prominently featured regional cuisine as a primary attraction, directly targeting American veterans who had experienced authentic Italian cooking during military service. Perhaps most significantly, returned Italian cooks became unintentional ambassadors for American-style democracy. Men who had experienced respectful treatment and professional validation in former enemy kitchens brought these values home. Giuseppe Lanza, who served at Fort Carson before returning to Sicily, later told an oral historian, "In America, I was judged only by what I created with my hands. This showed me another kind of society was possible." This powerful personal testimony, multiplied across thousands of returned cooks, contributed to Italy's post-war democratic development through the unlikely medium of shared meals and mutual respect established in military kitchens. June 1975. Chicago, Illinois. The bustling Italian restaurant displayed a framed photograph near the entrance. A black and white image showing its owner, Mario Conti, in an Italian service unit uniform, standing proudly in an American military kitchen 30 years earlier. The restaurant represented one success among thousands that collectively transformed American understanding of Italian cuisine, a culinary revolution that began in wartime mess halls. The long-term impact of the Italian cooking program permeated American food culture far beyond what military planners could have anticipated. Restaurant industry statistics document this transformation with remarkable clarity. In 1940, approximately 4,700 Italian restaurants operated in the United States, predominantly serving Americanized versions of Italian dishes. By 1970, this number had grown to 27,600 establishments, with market research showing increasing emphasis on regional authenticity and traditional techniques. Italian Americans leveraged the new appreciation for authentic cuisine created by the wartime cooking program. Census data shows that 28% of Italian American veterans used GI Bill benefits to establish food-related businesses. These entrepreneurs found a receptive market among fellow veterans exposed to genuine Italian cooking during military service. Antonio Esposito, who opened his Brooklyn restaurant in 1948, recalled, "Before the war, Americans thought Italian food meant one generic red sauce. After, they understood Italy had 20 regions with distinct traditions. Veterans who had eaten real Italian food in army mess halls became my first loyal customers." Statistical evidence demonstrates how thoroughly Italian cuisine entered mainstream American life. Consumer surveys from 1965 showed 83% of American households regularly preparing at least one Italian dish monthly, compared to 23% in pre-war measurements. Grocery industry records document the expansion of Italian food sections from an average of 4 linear feet in 1940 to 32 linear feet by 1970. Imported Italian food products, virtually non-existent before the war, grew to a $286 million industry by 1975. Specific dishes that entered the American culinary mainstream can be traced directly to the Italian Service Unit program. Military mess records document the first large-scale production of regional specialties: risotto from northern Italy, authentic pizza from Naples, fresh pasta techniques from Emilia-Romagna. These previously obscure preparations became American staples in the decades following the war. Pizza, in particular, transformed from a regional Italian specialty to an American food icon, with industry growth of 100% between 1945 and 1965. The contrast with pre-war American perception of Italian food was stark. Before 1941, market research showed American consumers primarily associated Italian cuisine with canned spaghetti, heavily sweetened tomato sauces, and generic Italian dishes bearing little resemblance to authentic preparations. By 1960, consumer surveys revealed sophisticated understanding of regional variations, ingredient quality distinctions, and traditional techniques, knowledge that began with exposure to genuine Italian cooking in military facilities. Former participants in the program provided powerful testimonials decades later. Domenico Salvatore, who cooked at Fort Hamilton before opening his Manhattan restaurant in 1952, stated in a 1973 interview, "When Americans made me a cook instead of a prisoner, they changed my entire understanding of their country. I expected oppression and found respect. This shaped everything I did after the war." This sentiment echoed across hundreds of oral histories collected from program participants. The legacy extended beyond restaurants into broader cultural diplomacy. American tourism to Italy increased from approximately 84,000 visitors annually pre-war to over 780,000 by 1965, with surveys showing culinary interests motivating 67% of travelers. This people-to-people exchange, built on shared appreciation for food, created personal connections that traditional diplomacy couldn't achieve. Former military personnel who had developed taste for authentic Italian cuisine became unofficial ambassadors promoting cross-cultural understanding through shared meals. Historians evaluating the program's significance have identified it as perhaps the most successful cultural exchange initiative of the war, remarkable because it developed organically rather than through deliberate planning. Dr. Elena Martinelli, studying post-war Italian-American relations, concluded, "The transformation of enemy cooks into cultural ambassadors achieved more lasting impact than formal diplomatic programs. Food created connections that transcended language barriers and political differences. The captured Italian cooks who had once been stunned when Americans asked them to feed everyone ultimately changed both nations through their culinary expertise. They demonstrated how food could bridge seemingly insurmountable divisions, creating understanding that formal diplomacy struggled to achieve. What began as a practical solution to feeding troops evolved into profound cultural exchange. The simple act of sharing meals, feeding former enemies with dignity and respect, accomplished what military force alone could not: genuine reconciliation and mutual appreciation that would nourish both nations for generations to come.